Alrighty, welcome, friends, to another episode here of Extreme Health Radio. Really excited about this particular show. This is going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about family constellation therapy with Mark Wolynn. And is it possible? On our show, we talk a lot about, obviously, physical health and well-being and all the different things we can do physically in our lives. But does our health depend on, or is it connected to family traumas and spirituality in any way? And we're going to be exploring this issue because, in my opinion, the answer is yes. And I think, personally, it is the root cause of all health conditions and health crises out there. And so for us to explore this or to not explore it wouldn't be any of a good service to you. So I wanted to bring Mark on the show. And before we start, I wanted to sort of welcome all of you John Bergman fans. You're probably wondering why we're on your channel, on Dr. Bergman's channel. We're actually working with Dr. John Bergman on the Extreme Health Academy. And that is a place for us to dive deeper with our health. And we release courses every single month there on Extreme Health Academy. And if you guys want to join that, you can go to extremehealthacademy.com, and that's where Dr. Bergman and I and Michael Bergman, his son, and my wife and co-host Kate all sort of dive a lot deeper into health and how to turn this body around. So let me make sure if there's any other things I want to let you guys know about. Oh yeah, our upcoming show schedule. I wanted to let you guys know about that. A lot of cool stuff happening on Extreme Health Radio coming up. Let me bring that up on the actual website here too, so you guys can take a look. Let's see, today we've got Mark Wolynn, obviously, about family constellation therapy. And then on Wednesday, we have Yarrow Willard, and we'll be talking with him about medicinal mushrooms and building your immune system through herbs and medicinal mushrooms and developing a deeper connection to nature. So if you're interested in herbs and healing and mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, that'll be on Thursday, October 3rd. And then, I'm sorry, that'll be Wednesday. My mistake. Thursday, we have sort of a special show. We're going to be talking with Brandon Amalani. We'll be talking with him about EMF mitigation strategies, personal and spiritual growth as well. He's had some really cool conversations with him on the phone recently, getting to know him, and he's a great guy. So that's going to be a special show on Thursday. And then on Friday, we're going to have Matt Blackburn on, and he's going to come into our studio, and we'll be talking with him about intermittent fasting, his supplementation protocols, light water magnetism, all of that fun stuff that Matt is into. So that's going to be Friday, October 5th. So a lot of cool things. If you haven't subscribed to our show, wherever you're listening, whether you're listening on an iPod or on iTunes or Stitcher or YouTube or Facebook, wherever you are, make sure to subscribe. So that way we can stay in contact with each other. And let's see here. That way you don't miss any of our shows. Oh, and by the way, our shows are 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. If you guys want to join the live show, just go to extremehealthradio.com, and there's links everywhere for that. So today's show is Mark Wolynn, and this is going to be great because he, like I said, he's the director of the Family Constellation Institute in San Francisco, and is a leading expert in the field of inherited family trauma. Interesting, right? Is it possible we inherit family traumas into our nervous system? He's a sought after lecturer, and is taught at the University of Pittsburgh, the Western Psychiatric Institute, the Omega Institute, as well as the New York Open Center, and a lot of really cool stuff he's doing. And he's based out of San Francisco, I believe. And he's the author of a book called "It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle." So really fascinating stuff. So let me bring Mark on the show here. All righty. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Justin. How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm doing great. I'm doing excellent. Thanks. I'm so glad to have you on. I learned about your work some years ago, and family constellation in general, probably about 10 years ago, and been really fascinated with this idea that, there are things like family traumas that can affect our physical biology. And I'm curious how you got started in all of this.
For me, I had a physical condition, symptoms, like many of us, that I couldn't explain, about 28 years ago, I began to lose the vision in one of my eyes.
Uh-huh.
And I was diagnosed with a chronic form of retinopathy. The way it was progressing, I was told that it would affect the other eye as well, and there was no cure for it. And I ended up uh, pretty devastated, as you can imagine,
Wow.
being told I was going to lose my vision. And because Western medicine didn't have an answer for me, I just went on a search for healing, a search that led me halfway around the globe to learn from some very wise teachers who taught me some fundamental principles
Mhm.
that aren't taught in our schools. One of those principles was the importance of healing my relationship with my parents. Um, so my parents and I had been pretty broken when I was a young man, and I had this anxiety, this depression. But before I could heal with my parents, I had to heal what stood in the way, which was inherited family trauma. Though I didn't know it at the time, specifically this anxiety um, that I'd inherited from my grandparents, all of whom were orphans.
Oh, wow.
Each one of them lost their mom when they were infants, and this feeling of being broken from a mother's love, this anxiety that rippled through my body, this fear of abandonment, this was the real cause of my vision loss, and this is what had passed down in my family. In fact, just to give you a little story attached to that, I remember being five years old, running into my mother's room every time she'd leave the house, and I'd open her drawers and I'd pry into her clothing and try to smell the smell of her uh, nightgowns and scarves, as though I
Right.
would never, as though I would never see her again. Which this would have been true for all of my grandparents who never did see their mothers again.
Okay.
And I remember sharing this story with my mom when, oh, probably 40 years later. And she said, "You did that too? When I left, I did the same thing when my mother left the house." And then
Oh,
my sister reading my book said, "You did that, honey, too? I did the same thing when mom would leave the house." So this pattern of never thinking you'd see your mother again and literally breathing into her clothes, this was a family pattern. But that's how I got started.
wow. What an interesting story. And so how did that relate to your vision then when you found out later
So
in life?
yeah, so I was told by these great teachers, they would look at me, I would be in line, I'd be, by this time I was doing lots of meditation and fasting and chanting and sitting at the feet of gurus, and I would be waiting in line all day to have a satsang,
All right.
a meeting with a spiritual teacher, and I'd get to the front of the line hoping he'd tell me what a good meditator I was, and instead he'd look right at me, and I guess I should say he looked right through me, and he
Uh-huh.
saw what I couldn't see, and he would say, "Go home and call your parents." And I'd heard this a number of times until I listened, and I went home and I healed my relationship with both parents, and strangely, my vision came back, um, which was unexpected. I didn't go there for that reason. I just, I went to heal because I was sounded like I'd heard it enough times and
Yeah.
sounded important. But when my vision returned, I thought, boy, there was something to these principles. So along the way, I started teaching how we can make peace with our parents, even though our childhood wasn't peaceful, or we can begin to receive something from them, even though had received very little. And along the way, I developed a process for healing the effects of inherited family trauma.
That's so fascinating. So when you healed your relationship with your parents, did you go there physically or did you do it over the phone? And then how long of a process did that happen before your eyesight came back?
So So the nitty gritty is I did go back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania,
Uh-huh.
and I remember thinking as my mom was about to put her arms around me, thinking that I would turn to steel, and shut down as soon as she held me, which is exactly what I did.
Uh-huh.
I tightened everywhere in my body, but I remember saying to my mom at that moment, Mom, please don't stop holding me, because I wanted to observe from the inside out what I was doing, how I was shutting down, how I wasn't letting in the connection. And I stayed in her arms for a great amount of time until something broke, which would have been my defenses
Right.
and really my heart in a way. My heart broke again. And I learned through that period to receive again. And in learning to receive and in learning to surrender, my vision came back.
Interesting. And how long of a process was that? Was that within a couple weeks or a couple months or?
No, no, it was probably several months. Yeah,
Interesting.
probably. Yeah, I mean, it's not the only thing I did, but
Yeah.
when I think about it, that's the main thing that really opened opened me up was
Mhm.
healing with my parents. And a lot of us can't heal with our parents because we have had difficult childhoods, and hence you mentioned family constellation work, which is one of the types of work that I do, and people seek out this work because they recognize that there's a pattern in the family that may have been passed down, something we can't explain, pattern of anxiety or depression. We never get to the bottom of this anxiety we carry, or anxiety that began suddenly after we re- turned a certain age or experienced a certain event, or all of a sudden we have symptoms after a particular event. And people seek out constellation work. And often what I find is a brokenness with the parents, which is why we seek out the work in the first place. Um, but in doing the work, we get to stand in a much clearer, broader place. We step into a new image. Let me start with what a family constellation is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a group process that allows participants to stand in as our family members
Okay.
to help us shift an old image that we carry in a new way. So dialogue is a part of it, or imagery is a part of it, or movement, physical movement is a part of it, or healing sentences, I might suggest to a participant, or body-centered releases that take place. All of these can contribute to break the destructive patterns of relational suffering we carry. It's an extremely powerful tool, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
In a family constellation, we step into the of feeling whole. And afterwards, we stand in a much stronger or a clearer place, I would say. And um, in doing so, in standing in this new place, we learn that our parents couldn't love us. Maybe that's true, but it wasn't personal.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, anyone any child in our birth order would have received similar mothering or fathering, and it wasn't personal. It's just the traumas block the flow of love. Traumas block the love our parents can give. It's
Interesting.
probably a
Yeah,
clearer
that's
way to say it.
fascinating. Fascinating. Do we know anything about the science or the biology of what happens when blood flow is perhaps constricted as a result of trauma and emotional trauma, and how these things affect the biology? Because I'm trying to figure out if we even know. I mean, sometimes we might just know that something works and that's good enough for us, or we might know that, but then we also might know the mechanisms of how these things happen. And so I'm trying to figure out if we have any sort of understanding of how a trauma like that could manifest itself in a person like you with their eyesight, or with someone else with a sore hip or something like that. I'm wondering, do we know the mechanisms of how that works, do you think?
Yeah, we do. It's a good question. How does trauma pass on? And
Uh-huh.
very science based, very simple actually. When a trauma happens, it changes us. Literally, it causes a chemical change in our DNA.
Mm.
And this changes the way our genes function, sometimes for generations. technically, after a trauma, a chemical tag will attach to the DNA and tell the cell to use or ignore a particular gene.
Okay.
And then the way the genes are affected will change how we act or feel. For example, we can become reactive or overly sensitive, or affected, to situations that are similar to the original trauma that our parents and grandparents experience, or so we can deal with it better. Um,
Hmm.
and these gene changes that we're learning, this is what's transmitted to our children. I'll give you an idea. If our grandparents came from a war-torn country with arrests and bullets and explosions, and maybe people gathered into the square and people shot, they would develop a skill set, to deal with these things.
Hmm.
An epigenetic change, for example, sharper reflexes might be one, or quicker reaction times, um, to help them survive this trauma. Now, the problem is they're going to pass this forward to us, which is a great skill set.
Yeah.
Now we have this hyper alert, hyper aroused, um, ability to navigate trauma. But the problem is we're also inheriting a stress response with the dials set to 10, prepared for a catastrophe that
Okay.
in our life never arrives. In
Yeah.
other words, we're born with fears and feelings and anxieties, that originated with our parents and grandparents. And we think these feelings are ours, and we don't make the link.
Uh-huh.
That's the problem. We don't even think to make this link. We're
Hmm.
not born with this clean hard drive that we think we are.
Yeah.
To use a computer analogy, there's an operating system already in place that contains the fallout of our parents and grandparents' traumas. And then our traumas, our kids will inherit.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
That's why I
really.
wrote this.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you see children, that are born. We have two twin boys that just are 3 months old now, and so understanding some of this work has really been key for us. But sometimes they'll go through sessions of crying, like incessant crying because they're hungry, and when there's twins, it's really challenging, right, to feed both of them and make sure that none of them go through a traumatic experience. And I'm wondering, I've heard people say in the past that, like, it doesn't necessarily matter if the trauma is a perceived trauma or an intensified version of a trauma that's not really that big of a deal. All that matters is that the baby's nervous system is going through something. So my question is, and I hope it's not the case, but my question is, like, if you were to, like, for example, hit a baby, the baby would cry, right? But the baby's hungry and going through so much trauma and crying as a result of being hungry. Are we putting our babies through something by not being able to feed them on time and prevent them from crying like that, do you think?
It's a good question. So, um, let me answer it this way. Traumas need not be very large
Okay.
to affect the next generation. For example, one of the most replicated studies in all of epigenetics is they take baby mice and they separate the baby mice from their mothers for even very short periods of time. In some studies, it's only 2, 3 hours a day
Hmm.
for the first 2 weeks of life. That's it.
Wow.
And then as the mice age, um, they begin to develop what we would call symptoms of depression in humans. And
Interesting.
as the mice continue to age, the symptoms worsen. And in one particular study that I mentioned in my book, um, the male mice, um, uh, uh, didn't exhibit the behaviors themselves, but appeared to epigenetically transmit the behavioral changes to their female offspring. So trauma is sort of a equal opportunity employer in a sense. The father can pass it to the daughter, or the father can pass it to the son. The mother can pass it to the daughter, or she can pass it to the son. And these traumas need not be very, um, profound to affect our kids.
Hmm.
Um, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah, because yeah, I mean that's a challenging thing. So now with the traumas that are happening, and it makes sense because I've heard other studies when with regards to mice as well, where they'll have a mice sort of going through a maze, and at one particular area of the maze, they may shock the mice or put like a strong smell of like an orange essential oil or something, and then they'll shock the mice. And then 3 or 4 generations down the line, a mice doesn't even need to be shocked or go into the maze, just exposed to the oil of the orange, and it senses and it goes through some kind of trauma physical response to that, even though it was 4 generations of mice before the mice. So
Exactly.
it does make sense that this stuff would pass down for sure.
Exactly. And the study that you're referring to was done out of Emory Medical School in Atlanta, where they shocked these mice. And
Hmm.
the strangest thing, they take this, they see epigenetics. So let me explain a little bit again, about epigenetics, and so the viewer can understand. So the mice are shocked, and in order to protect themselves, they have an adaptive change. So there are areas of the brain that become enlarged where there will be more smell receptors so that the mice can detect this scent at lesser concentrations. So thereby they have a chance to brace and protect themselves. So the enlarged areas was one adaptive modification to help those mice. Well, that's what's getting passed down. So they also see changes in the blood as well as in the brain and in the sperm. So they
Uh-huh.
take some of the sperm from these shocked mice, and they inject the sperm into to females who were not shocked, and to impregnate them. And then they looked at the progeny, the pups and the grandpups. And as you mentioned, the strangest thing is that the pups and the grandpups became jumpy and jittery just by smelling the smell. They were not shocked. They had inherited the stress response without directly experiencing the trauma themselves. And that's us.
Yeah.
Here we are inheriting these adaptive changes, these brain changes, these nervous system changes um,
Hmm.
that can be epigenetic.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean the sequence of the genome changes. What it means is that the way the gene expresses um, is is that's what's passed down. And it
That's
can be a good thing, right? It can give us this skill set, and it can be a bad thing because it can make us riled up and
yeah.
hyper vigilant and hyper cautious and hyper aware. And the continuous stress can be harmful for our bodies the way it was harmful for my eyes.
Hmm. Now, do
So
you
going
think?
back to going just really quickly, going back to my story, so I inherit this orphan fear, this orphan terror, the
Uh-huh.
terror of babies, all my grandparents who were separated from their mothers. And so I inherit this terror. And this was what was the real cause of my vision loss.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because in our modern Western world, we're not looking for stuff like that. We're just focused mainly on the biology, and all this other stuff is just kind of not really looked at all, let alone talked down on. It's not even aware in people's consciousness. And I'm wondering too if if there's a DNA or some sort of change, because it would make sense that like a nervous system would happen as a result of a trauma, or someone's little idiosyncrasies would happen, or their desires would change, or there might be have a nervous tick. But I'm wondering if there's biological changes, because you mentioned a few minutes ago about how in the mice, their nasal passages would sort of open up and dilate so that they could be able to deal with some of this stress. And I'm wondering, like, if people's physical characteristics could be altered in some way, and they can show physical differences as a result of family trauma.
Actually, that's true. There's a study um, that was done by Rachel Yehuda, who's one of um, the mothers of epigenetics in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
She was about 12, 13, 14 years ago. She was looking at Holocaust survivors and their offspring. And she found out that the children of Holocaust survivors carried the same trauma symptoms as their parents. Literally, They carried the fear and the terror and the anxiety. But in terms of the physiology, they carried changes in the cortisol system. They carried um, compromised, actually low cortisol systems. And so what would happen is these children would have physiologic changes, just like the parents. It gets even further. She's the one that also did that big study with at the World Trade Center bombings when the World Trade Centers were hit by the planes.
Uh-huh.
She looked at mothers who were pregnant at or near the World Trade Center and who went on to have PTSD and saw that their babies also had PTSD and had physical changes. They had 16 different genetic markers. They were smaller for their gestational age, et
Hmm.
cetera, et cetera. So as you're saying, yes, even physiologic changes happen to us from trauma.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, and I think that one of the things that I've been learning about this kind of work and this deeper spiritual work lately is the idea that when we come down with a particular illness in the body, we think that we have something, right? But we don't think about our connection generations before us and generations after us, and this is sort of a group energetically. It's a group sort of not diagnosis, but a group health issue that we may be dealing with. And so it's almost as if generations before and generations after are there with you in a room and they're all going through this together. But in our Western world, we just think we alone have this, right? But we lose that connection 3 generations up and 3 generations back. And I don't know, that to me is really interesting as well.
Yeah, it's a profound idea that we're connected way
Yeah.
more beyond this self that we think.
Mm-hmm.
Many people come to me with the idea that, well, this is how I'm wired. I'm just this way. I was just born this way. I'll tell you a story, an interesting story. I mentioned the story in my book. Um, there's a guy, he's 25 years old, who's tried to kill himself 4 different ways.
Uh-huh.
And he that was born with this feeling, I need to die. That's how he's born. So the first thing he does is he decides, well, I'm going to join the army and I'm going to become a hero and I'm going to die on the front line. He signs up to be a grunt
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to be this hero and I'm going to march madly with my weapon and I'll be shot on the front lines and I'll be killed. And this is his dream to do
Wow.
this because he feels he needs to die. This
Mm-hmm.
is the strange thing. And he believes it's him that needs to die.
Right.
And so um, he finds out that his unit isn't being deployed. And other guys would be all excited. Oh, thank God, we dodged the bullet.
Right.
But this guy gets irate. And he then gets in his car and he drives 90 miles an hour down the turnpike, the highway.
Uh-huh.
And because we're going to have a cop pull him over. And as soon as the state policeman pulls him over, he's going to pretend to go for the state policeman's gun. And then, of course, the state policeman will have to shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
And he does this. He drives 90 miles an hour down the highway, and never gets stopped. You and I would drive 10 seconds and we'd be pulled over.
Yeah.
But nothing happens. And so he then decides he's going to go to Washington, D.C. and have a toy gun. This is a true story. And he's going to climb over the fence uh, to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he gets, and he goes to do this, he parks on Pennsylvania Avenue. He gets out of his car. But when he tries to get to the fence, it's every 5 feet. Secret Service agents are there, and he can't climb over the fence. And he's not deterred. This guy now, he's going to go take a toy gun, and where some politician is speaking, he's going to stand up and pretend to aim the gun. But he figures with his luck, he will be wrestled to the ground and spend his life in jail, and he won't achieve his purpose, his end, which is to die. Now, when you listen to my story, all 4 of the ways he wanted to kill himself were similar. Did you hear anything in that?
Yeah, they
He
were
needed
all by authority figures with guns, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
He needed to be shot by someone in authority.
Interesting.
So he comes to my office and says, you know, I need to die. And I go, how do you know it's you? They go, what do you
Uh-huh.
mean? I go, tell me about your family history. Let's see who really needed to be shot. And then he tells me about his grandfather, who was a high up in Mussolini's cabinet
Oh, wow.
and had done terrible, terrible things to people, had been responsible for a lot of people dying.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, when the war ended, Mussolini was hung and the
Mm-hmm.
rest of his cabinet was shot by firing squad.
Mm-hmm.
And and this man, as the war was ending, he falsified his papers and he um, came to the States and he had evaded his fate, he thought, but he did not. It merely passed into the hands of his grandson, who then goes about to continue his fate, believing he's the one that needs to die and he's the one that needs to be shot. How amazing is that?
That is unbelievable. Unbelievable story. My goodness. Yeah. I mean, this stuff it runs so deep with us. And I'm curious if you guys are watching this, you can go over and check out Mark's website if you want. I'll bring it up here. It's markwolynn.com, MarkWolynn.com, and really fascinating stuff. When we come back from the break, I want to ask him about what it truly means to honor your father and mother. And I have a couple thoughts of some things I've thought about lately about that, but I'm curious. Mark's the expert here, and I want to ask him about what it truly means. So I wanted to let you guys know too, a lot of people have been writing in lately asking about the Symbiotica, which is one of the products that we promote in our store. It's an amazing product, and if you look into the work of like Dr. Jack Kruse, he talks a lot about the most important substance as far as nutrition that we should be concerned with is DHA, because DHA it does so many things within the body. It's a pure nervous system food. And what it does is it allows the body to hold on to an electric charge. So it actually creates voltage in the body in the mitochondrial membrane. And it allows the mitochondria to function properly. And if you guys know anything, obviously, about mitochondria, there's roughly 3,000 to 10,000 mitochondria per cell. And we have, 100 trillion cells in the body. So what a lot of people also don't realize about the genes and genetic expression in mitochondria is that the genes take orders from the mitochondria. And genetic expression is determined by, at least on a physical level, which is what we always tell people, on a physical level, by the mitochondria. And DHA is pure mitochondrial food. And so we've been giving it to our little babies, and they just love this stuff. And the Symbiotica is actually infused with astaxanthin, which is another way to allow the body to hold on to more light, which is an incredible way to get more biophotons on your solar panel, which is our skin. And so if you're interested in holding on to more light, because we are light beings, if you're interested in holding on to more light and creating a nervous system environment in your body that's healthy and vibrant, the Symbiotica is really something that you should consider. So if you enter the code in EHR, you can get 15% off. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Shervine, for making that possible for our listeners. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you is about the Relax Far Infrared Sauna. This thing is incredible. We just recently did another show with Phil Wilson a couple days ago, probably last week, about the Relax Far Infrared Sauna. And I'm really happy to have been able to get back in this thing. I took about 2 months off, which I haven't done. I haven't taken more than probably 2 days off from sitting in this sauna for the past probably 6 years. But like I was telling Mark before, twins is pretty full on to have twins. So I'm really glad to be back in this sauna. And sauna therapy, for those that don't know, stressing your immune system is incredibly important for your physical health. Like there are studies showing that this one's crazy, a 40% decrease in all-cause mortality from people who sit in the sauna an average of 4 to 6 times per week. That's crazy, right? A 40% decrease in all-cause mortality. But one of the things about the sauna therapy that I love is that it allows the body to sweat out toxins and chemicals that we're exposed to that sort of store themselves in our fat cells. And that's where they sort of go. The fat cells are sort of a repository for chemicals and pollutants and fungi and things like that we get exposed to in our daily life. And when you expose those cells to this high oscillating far infrared light inside the sauna, it actually resonates the cell and vibrates the cell to squeeze. And what happens is that the squeezing process of this allows for the body to release these toxins through our skin. And that's why sauna therapy has been used for thousands of years all around the world. And I'm going to start combining it with cold thermogenesis as well. So you can go back from cold to hot, and really dilate those blood vessels. And if you are, someone who wants to have longevity be a part of your life, you're really interested in experiencing optimal health, sauna therapy absolutely must, in my opinion, be a part of your protocol. So I really love these things. Like I always say, though, these things aren't going to cure or prevent any disease. They're not going to do anything other than speed up the process of you getting more and more healthy. And I don't want you to think that because you don't have a sauna or because you don't have Symbiotica DHA, you're not going to be healthy. True and robust health comes from within you. And there are people who live for hundreds of years, that never did sauna therapy, never had DHA. So you don't need these things to be healthy. But I do like the fact that there are great mitigation strategies for living in this toxic world. So if you want to improve your health and bring these things into your home, I'd highly recommend learning more about this relaxed far infrared sauna. So many benefits to it, and we're just really, really big fans of this thing. And I want to bring Mark back on the show, and let me do this really quick so I can bring me on over here and then bring Mark on up top. But this idea of family constellation therapy and this idea of honoring your father and mother, and I think it's really fascinating. And explain to me if I'm wrong, but I've heard it explained like in the Bible it says honor your father and mother. We all know that, but from my understanding and things I've been learning in the last few years, it wasn't as much of a commandment as it was what's going to happen as a result of the way that this whole thing is set up. So we're set up to carry the burdens of previous generations. And by doing that, that's our way of sort of honoring our mom and dad by carrying the burdens that they weren't able to carry on their own. And we do that subconsciously. In the same way that if you're walking down the street with them and they have they're carrying 5 heavy buckets, you'd want to take the buckets from them and allow them to have a little bit of a break. So the way I understand is that this is sort of happening at a subconscious level, and we carry the burdens of our mom and dad so that we can honor them. But what I've been learning lately is that we don't have to carry those same burdens. We can honor them in other ways by offering the body different, like a compromise. And so I'm curious about what your thoughts are, Mark, about this whole idea of honoring your father and mother and what that actually means.
It's complex. Many of us, as I said, have difficult childhoods. And when they hear the words honor the parents, they think, well, I can't do that. I felt hurt by my parents.
Mm-hmm.
But what I am going to say is I found that if anything can immunize us from repeating the suffering of the past, it's healing our relationship with them. Mm-hmm. Because what we reject in them is likely to resurface in our lives. So we talked about this, you said this unconscious strategy. You're right, there's an unconscious loyalty, a way of sharing their suffering. And we sometimes, the more we reject them, the more likely we are to repeat what we find negative in them. It's the opposite of what we think is going on. We think, well, the more I push them away and I move to the other coast and I live far away and I don't have anything to do with them, right, the more I'll have freedom from them. And what we find is it's actually quite the opposite. The more we push them away, the more like we are to subconsciously weave a subterranean thread. And repeat. I call this, we've merged with the parents. In other words, mom loses her great love, we lose our great love. Dad fails when he's 40. We start to shoot ourselves in the foot in business around the same age.
Hmm.
Mom and dad break up at 32, and all of a sudden at 32, we look at our partner and we think, oh, he doesn't do it for me anymore. And never making the link that there is this unconscious connection to the past.
Hmm.
I, I've I've observed that when we ignore the past or reject the past, it comes back to haunt us. But when we explore it, we don't have to repeat it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a couple of people in the chat room that are asking, and it's a good question too. Would it be good to know about our past lives, do you think?
I can't comment about that.
Uh-huh.
Um, whether I try to stay very science based
Uh-huh.
in the sense of I can talk about trauma in terms of biological traumas that we've inherited, because that's my field of study. As far as past lives, I'm sure we're affected um, by events that occur before this incarnation. But how can I tell you?
Yeah.
Because my memory, just like your memory, we don't really remember fully what happened there.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember
But I'll
reading a
tell you, if I get there before you, I will tell you.
That's so great. Yeah, I remember reading this book called Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Mace, and she was talking about why is it that if past lives are true, why do we not remember? And she was talking about how we have these sacred contracts before we come into this life, and we sort of, what she says, drink from the river of forgetfulness before we arrive, so that because if we knew everything that was going on, and if past lives are real, and we knew all of the stuff that was going on, it would almost be like we're cheating, right? We're like, and it would be an unfair advantage almost, because the whole point is to go through this life, right? And to experience what this life has to offer us, and to grow and to reconnect on multiple layers, right? I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
The whole point is stepping in the potholes and learning surrender,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
learning to love. Yeah.
Learning to love and learning to let go and surrender. I mean, that's a huge thing for most everyone, because we all have our attachments, and that's challenging too. So, with the people that come in to see you, are they coming for? Are they coming because they notice some physical issue in their life, like a physical issue, or are they coming because they just sort of know that they have these things they have to work out, and they know they need to reconnect on those levels? Or is it more of a physical thing, like a?
Well, I work largely with everything, but
Mm-hmm.
mostly chronic symptoms, persistent symptoms that the medical establishment, kind of says, we don't know what to do with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I work with conditions that are chronic,
Mm-hmm.
um, anxieties we can't explain, fears we can't explain, depressions that we never get to the bottom of. Like I said earlier, we have these symptoms, but they may not have originated with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the book that I've written, I teach the reader how to become a detective,
Mm-hmm.
uncovering the clues in his or her symptoms, or in his or her language, what I call core language. Um, and that's the way we know if we're connected with traumas of the past. We begin to repeat certain events that have taken place in our family,
Mm-hmm.
certain we have a language, a trauma language. For example, this guy that came to me and said, "I need to die." When he used those words, "I need to die," that was very clear to me. I looked at him at 24 years old or 25, and I said, "What did you do that you need to die? Did
Mm-hmm.
you take a life? Did you harm somebody?" He said, "No, no, nothing like that."
Hmm.
You see, this language which is peculiar and idiosyncratic.
Mm-hmm.
I work with this thing called, as I talk about in my book, core language or trauma language, but it isn't just verbal language. It's the language that our fears express. It's
Hmm.
the language in our unexplained symptoms. It's the language in our destructive behaviors. That's a language. We keep doing the same darn thing, which
Uh-huh.
is destructive. That's talking to me. That's as I hear what the client is doing destructively, that's speaking a language. As I listen to the relationship struggles of the client and the ways in which the client deals with money or success, the potholes that he or she continually steps in, this forms a breadcrumb trail. And when you know how to follow it, even if you don't know what happened in your family history, when you learn how to follow it, it will give you more than a glimpse of what may have happened back there because you carry it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. I never thought about like, a lot of times we think language and that's the words we speak, and then some people will take it a little bit further. It's what we think about. It's not necessarily expressed language, but then this idea that the behaviors that you're exhibiting, or maybe even the thoughts or the fears that you have, that's a language that's telling a story, and that's a language. I never really thought about that. Like if you were to just observe someone in a self-destructive action, doing something subconsciously, he doesn't even know what he's doing. That's a language too, right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's
Interesting.
exactly what I'm saying.
Interesting.
So the language of our self-destructive behaviors we need to pay attention to. That again, that's why I wrote this book. People ask me, how do I know if I am affected by um, inherited family trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And there are telltale signs.
Mm-hmm.
So we might experience a fear or an anxiety or a symptom that strikes suddenly as soon as we reach a certain age or we hit a certain milestone or an event in our life. For example, we get married
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden we're sick, or we leave home for the first time and we have a physical condition, or we have a child and we have a horrible fear or a terror, or we get rejected by our partner for the first time. And it goes back to an earlier rejection,
Mm-hmm.
either in our childhood or even earlier. I, it's as though there's this ancestral alarm clock that starts ringing inside us. I'll give you an example. I once worked with this woman who had a terrible, absolutely all consuming anxiety. And that's why she came. And I said, how long have you had the anxiety? And she said, ever since I've been pregnant. She was pregnant to have a
Okay.
baby.
Okay.
And I said, so I knew anxiety begins with somehow this pregnancy. So I started to ask about this anxiety to get some of that trauma language. And she said, my worst fear, she said, is I'll harm my baby. And now
Mm.
I've gotten everything I need. Somebody, maybe her, maybe someone in her family, terrified they'd harm a baby or harmed a baby. So I asked her the question, did you ever harm a baby? She said, no.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, did anyone in your family ever harm a baby? And she was about to say no. And she
Oh.
said, no. And then she said, oh, wait a minute. When my grandmother was a young woman, she had a baby and she lit a candle and caught the curtains on fire and caught the house on fire. And the house burned down and she was unable to get her baby out and the baby died. But we weren't allowed to talk about it, which is exactly
Huh.
the type of thing you hear when there's inherited trauma. People either don't have the information because nobody's talking about it, or they're not allowed to talk about it because they don't want to upset their parents or grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could work with this woman and treat her because what she carried was her grandmother's experience in her anxiety.
So, how do you think that her grandmother's experience, like, how they talk about genes and how they skip generations and this type of thing? How would something like that? How would it have affected this woman's her mom herself? Because it started with her grandmother. So, is it possible that these traumatic experiences can they skip a generation too, or did it affect her mom in some other way and then it affected her in a different way, but it's still the same thread
Both,
running through?
both could be true. Her
Okay.
mom could have been affected one way and she another, or it could have skipped a generation and affected her. Again, the mother was born later, so the grandmother's first child dies. Now the mother's born
Uh-huh.
into the womb, into the womb that has this condensed, collapsed, traumatic memory
Uh-huh.
of my child, my child, my child. And that would, in some way, I would suspect, affect what genes are selected. That would, in some way, infuse the. Think here. Let me give you another way to look at this that isn't even epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
Embryologists have known for over 100 years that when mother is a fetus inside grandma's womb, a 5 months a fetus, that the egg that will become you or me is already in mother's womb at 5 months a fetus. Meaning, because the female cell line stops dividing when mom's a fetus. So you and I were in our mother's womb as she was in our grandmother's womb. So essentially, in essence, you and I existed before we were even born.
Mm-hmm.
So would we not know even that way some aspect of the traumas that preceded us from this shared biological environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So, I've often thought about that, about how, this kind of stuff works, and you can start seeing it when you start looking at your own life and you start looking at all the different things that are happening to your friends and family or to yourself. You see it a lot. Like my wife and co-host, who's not on the show today, she was always, had a fear of birth, and it was sort of like, why does she have this, right? And then she found out subsequently that her mom had, prior to her mom had her sister first as the oldest sister, and then got pregnant again. And then that pregnancy was a boy, but the pregnancy didn't hold, and so she miscarried. And then the next child to come along was my wife, Kate. And so it would make sense that she would have a fear of birth because her mom was probably hoping that in her pregnancy with Kate, she would hold on to the child and she wouldn't miscarriage again or miscarry again. And, so there's this underlying fear there. And so, I mean, you start looking at what the concepts of what you're saying and the application into all of our life, and we just think about all the little things that we have, you can start really pinpointing a lot of this stuff if you really sort of dig deep and do the work, right?
You nailed it. You nailed it with that story. So, mom would have been terrified during the next pregnancy,
Mm-hmm.
which could have affected Kate in numerous ways. But clearly, in one way that you mentioned, that Kate was afraid of pregnancy, that she too could lose a baby or
Mm-hmm.
something terrible would happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you start to see this
These
that
are trauma. Yeah, these are traumas. These are heritable, affecting traumas.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure you get the question a lot, and I'd be remiss to not ask this because a lot of people are probably thinking. There's a couple different questions. One is, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, and that is doing the work even though you sort of, you hate your parents and you want to get away from them. There's that. And we've talked a little bit about that. But the other side is like people are thinking, well, I'm adopted. I don't know who my parents were, and I've never done any ancestry.com and looked up our genealogy and all of this stuff. But the type of work that you're doing, if someone works with someone like you or someone similar to you, it goes much deeper than this, and you don't necessarily need to know all the details, do you?
No, it lives, as I said earlier, it lives in our trauma language.
Mm-hmm.
It lives in our repeated behaviors, in our destructive behaviors, in our relationship choices, um, in our ways we deal with money, success, health. It's there in our
Mm-hmm.
verbal language.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you
Yeah.
don't need to know much about your family history.
It's
You are
funny.
your You are your family history.
I know, right? Everything's locked up within you, at least on a physical level. It's funny. There's a quote from Eckhart Tolle, and he was saying, someone was asking him about, their sort of idiosyncrasies and their, kind of anger issues and stuff, and he was saying, the purpose of life sometimes is to be frustrating. That's the purpose. And he was saying, like all of these things are there as roadmaps. The very fact that your grandmother or your aunt or your uncle pushes your buttons, what else would she be here for other than to do that? To show us, to be a roadmap and a guide for further growth and spiritual connectedness. That's why we go through these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I often say to my students that the contraction of the trauma is seeking its expansion. So it will repeat in the hopes of finding a healthy outcome. So in the contraction itself of our trauma, as long as we're not looking, we will have many incidences of reliving the same trauma again and again until we pay attention, because ultimately this trauma wants to heal.
That's really interesting you say that. So let me make sure I understand. So the trauma is happening and it continues to happen, or not the trauma, but the event. So we go through things that our grandparents went through, our great-great-grandparents. Now I'm wondering, is it possible that these things in and of themselves have their own sort of life form? Because is the purpose of them happening to me so that I will overcome them and sort of stop that? Or do they want to keep manifesting kind of like a parasite? Like they want to keep going
The
in.
opposite.
Okay.
It's what you said at first.
Okay.
I truly believe that the traumas that we go through and come out the other side will make us more potent, more surrendered, more loving, more present. And it's the very traumas themselves, the difficulties themselves that we surmount through, well, basically surmounting is surrender.
Mm-hmm.
We find that really we can't control a whole lot. And in doing so, we emerge more potent.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and to realize too that, like you said before, when people say, "Oh, this is how I'm wired," or "This is who I am," a lot of times we don't realize that all of those idiosyncrasies and all of those sort of things that we would call negative parts of our personality, they're not even ours, are they?
Some are not, some are.
Uh-huh.
Again, I don't want to say that old trauma is inherited, because that's completely not true. We have traumas from the schoolyard, traumas from our birth, traumas from the delivery, traumas from our attachment with our mom, traumas, physical accidents. I mean, there are many traumas. However, it is important to have an eye open to traumas that precede even our birth, traumas that are heritable.
Mm-hmm. On our show, we talk a lot about, obviously, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that quote. And, it makes a lot of sense if we live a healthy, lifestyle connected to nature, connected to ourselves, connected to each other. All of these things are going to support, robust health. And I'm wondering about that idea when applied to the work that you do. So is it possible to, let's say in this lifetime, my sort of sacred contract, like Carolyn May said, is to come in and to learn a particular lesson about XYZ. And in order to learn that lesson, I need to go through some sort of physical condition, whether it's diabetes or a broken arm or some, heart attack or something like that. Let's say I come in to learn that. Is it possible for us to preempt all of that by doing deep spiritual work so that we can learn those lessons before we have to be sort of hit over the head with a physical condition, do you think?
Eckhart Tolle makes that notion, and I think if we could be so diligent as to stay present all the time,
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't which is quite a feat.
Yeah.
Um, there's nowhere for unhappiness or anxiety or depression to cling to, as he says. If we're not in the pain body, but we're embodied, then yeah, if we know how to stay embodied, in a sense, we can preempt. Um, that's I would say that's true.
Yeah, yeah, because like it would make a lot of sense, but then would there still be a need for spiritual work and you know, doing all of this deeper work, or is it something that people would want to work on only if they're suffering in some way?
You know, ultimately, each of us is born in some way with a challenge, a
Uh-huh.
struggle, or we, like I said earlier, we reach a phase in our life where that struggle begins to appear. And for me, it's about changing the brain. And I'm sure on your show, as I get a sense of you and your show, this is something that you talk about quite a bit, that we've got to have an experience that's powerful enough, can be a family constellation or working with someone on one, but we have to have an experience that's powerful enough to pull traction away from the stress response, the trauma response, the midbrain, the limbic system that's always in activation, and bring engagement to other parts of the brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, where we can integrate these traumas and we can heal. So I always talk about, can we have an experience that can pull not just traction or engagement, but literally pull glucose and circulation and oxygen away from the beefed up amygdala
Mm-hmm.
and bring it to other parts of the brain so we can feel more free? Can we have an experience of compassion? What you and I talked about, healing with the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have an experience of comfort or support? Can we have an experience of loving kindness or generosity? Can we have an experience of strength or peace so deep that it allows us to trust it and to be able to practice the feelings of this new experience? So when we talk about presence, for me, that means staying in some sort of body centered practice with breath or a feeling state like comfort or support, um, where we are pulling traction away from the stress response. And not only that, not only are we rewiring the brain, which I'm sure you talk about a lot, you know, the new neural pathways that get wired and and tracked.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also, when we have these positive experiences, we're also um, activating, stimulating the release of feel good neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and GABA, or feel good hormones like oxytocin or estrogen.
Uh-huh.
And we can even, as I talk about in my book, we can even change the way our genes express. By having positive experiences, we can change the way our genes express so our children are less likely to receive what's negative from us and can begin to receive what's positive.
So when you talk about positive experiences, are you talking about experiences that you create through doing some work that, you know, facilitation, or are you talking about, you know, taking a trip somewhere and just feeling good and doing?
Talking about something that we trust and believe in as important. For example, you're led through a piece of work, and through this piece of work, you find the support of your parents where it wasn't before,
Oh.
or you find the support of maybe spiritual connection, or you a way in which you personally, me, us, the listener, knows how to support him or herself, the child part inside that's fragmented. And
Uh-huh.
when we practice the feelings and the sensations over and over again, we change our brain. And again, we change our heart, change our body.
Yeah. That's powerful. So what does a family constellation look like? What do you facilitate multiple people, and how does that look sometimes with you? I'm sure there's different variations, but when someone comes in to
So
see you and does this, how does it look?
well, when someone comes in to see me, we don't have the group to do family constellations with other people. So I have devised ways in which we can do it together, just the two of us.
Okay.
And so sometimes I use what would be called, well, footprints on the floor, where I'll ask somebody to go stand as her mother. You know, go stand there as your mother and tell me what happens in your body.
Mm.
Or I'll have somebody uh, look at the footprints over there and close their eyes and feel the mother on those footprints and say, you know what? Close your eyes and hear her say to you, if more had come to me from my mother, I would have had more to give you. I really would have. And I would have loved to have given that to you. But I didn't get a lot from her. And that's what happened. You know, sometimes truth named like that is profound enough to open something in us where we can begin to hear it and heal. Now,
Yeah.
you asked me about a family constellation. That's also something I do. I lead big groups
Uh-huh.
and I pick representatives in the audience to stand as family members for the client so we can have those sentences come in real time from live people. And that's helpful too. That's exciting. It's an
Gosh,
exciting form of healing.
I can't imagine how powerful that must be, because it's not like a group that are just, at a Tony Robbins event. I mean, this is a group of people who really want to do deep spiritual work together and are supportive of each other. I imagine you've seen some pretty powerful, or have had some pretty powerful experiences in those types of settings, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
That's why I still do this work.
yeah.
Uh, if I knew a work more profound than this inherited trauma work or family constellation work or healing the child fragmented young parts of us, if I knew, or the body centered trauma work, if I knew something deeper than that, I would do it.
Yeah, there's I'm going to bring up a page on your website, and for those that are listening on the podcast version, I want to ask you, after I read a couple of these things that I think are pretty profound, what people are going to get out of reading the book. And I think you can probably gather a lot of that by just the conversation Mark and I have had so far. But it says here on his website, what is family trauma? And it says, simply put, many of us relive the tragedies from previous generations and rarely make the link. Examples from the book include a man in jail for a crime he didn't commit, discovered he was paying the price for a murder his father had been acquitted for a generation earlier. And then a woman who couldn't understand her sudden indifference towards her husband was entangled with her grandmother, who lost her husband tragically at the same age. Example 3 is a young Cambodian boy whose self-destructive behavior was linked to the murder of his grandfather by the Khmer Rouge. And then number 4 of 5 is a woman with claustrophobia, unable to ride in a plane or elevator, made the connection to her father's parents who perished in a gas chamber. Wow. And finally, a woman with a paralyzing fear that her child would die discovered that her grandparents lost 2 children before they immigrated to the United States.
That was a
Man,
story you just told me about Kate, right? You just told me that she carried a fear of being pregnant.
yeah, I know. The fear of the
Birth,
birth process, yeah.
yeah, the birth process.
It's
So
amazing.
those are all stories in the book.
Hmm.
But the way I designed the book, do you mind if I mention that for the readers?
Sure, please, please.
I designed the book for the reader to not have to go anywhere, but I ask a series of questions and give a series of practices in the book for the reader to begin to unearth this trauma language that he or she carries. And this trauma language can then lead us to make the link in our family history to what happened. And then when we've become the detective making the link, and then the last third of the book is designed with practices to help us heal, to help change our brain.
Okay, so this is really cool. So this is sort of designed to allow us to empower ourselves, really, to do the work ourselves and to not necessarily need to go to someone.
We may need to, right? We
Okay.
may uncover something and say, you know what, I want some support with this. So I'm going to go to my therapist and tell my therapist what I've unearthed in here.
Hmm.
But some people reading the book just make the changes just by reading it. I've had so many people respond in that way.
Hmm. I want to ask you one final question when it comes to the work that you do, because it sounds like you are so pretty diverse in the way that you look at things. We've done shows on, let's see, family biology and let's see, recall healing, timeline therapy. Are all of these similar to each other, or do you facilitate all of them and choose based on the person you're seeing? And what's the difference between these therapies, do you think?
So I don't know some of the ones you mentioned,
Okay.
or I don't practice them. But what I do practice is a body-centered form of trauma therapy. I do also practice a way to integrate the child parts of ourselves that have been split off or fragmented.
Okay.
I practice family constellation work and inherited trauma work, and also looking at how we have this trauma language that is haywire inside us,
Yeah.
this either behavioral or verbal language that we've never made the link. We think we're the problem. We think we're the source of our own suffering,
Uh-huh.
and not always true.
I like that. I really like that. Okay, so in your book at the end, you said you give people exercises to go through and to sort of work on some of these things, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
That's
exercises, practices that will change the brain. And the idea here is our brains need to change so we can start. We need to rewire.
yeah.
Yeah, so we can live a freer life.
I like that. Rewire.
Many, well, many of us are wired up with these traumatic memories that don't give us a lot of freedom, where our
Hmm.
body stress response is always enacting. So
Mm.
we're living in what you could call as limbic lockdown,
Mm.
where our limbic system is just overcharged. We talked about this before. There's an excess of glucose and oxygen and blood flow going to the amygdala rather than to the parts of the brain that would be most generous, or these parts of the brain to be enacted and helping us have a different life.
Right, right. Wow, interesting, interesting work that you're doing. If someone wants to go further, let's say they're gonna, pick up the book and read it and do some of these exercises, is it possible for them to connect with you and do something remotely, or should they? And if they need to look somewhere locally for themselves to do something in the physical form, is there a place where you can find a practitioner?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I would suggest they start with the book and unearthing their trauma language.
Okay.
And then if they want to do some work remotely, I can work by Skype or Zoom. There's also other practitioners that I could recommend in their town, people I've trained, um, but to start with the book.
Hmm. Wow, Mark, thank you so much for your time. There's a bunch of questions that were sent over to me to sort of have, to ask, but I like to take things off the cuff and share my own experiences and, dive into your work. And so I just, Kate and I were talking just yesterday about how the Extreme Health sort of radio show is really just a clever design for personal growth and spiritual connection. It's just doing it through the means of the physical food we eat and how we take care of ourselves. But really, ultimately, what interests me most is the kind of work that you do. And I really think this is the core of everything. The physical body, in my opinion, is just the end result of some other issue that's happening. That's the real core. And it's that, if we were all spirits and ghosts, we wouldn't need to grow because we wouldn't experience any pain of any kind, right? So
Your show sounds great. I've been kind of listening to the things you've been talking about and the things that you've been presenting. You seem to amass a lot of healing resources. But thank you for having me on, Justin. I've enjoyed talking with you and sharing this work and um, meeting your viewers from afar.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, thank you, Mark. You're amazing. So the website is markwolynn.com, right?
Mark Wolynn, WOLYNN.com.
Awesome.
And the book is called It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. And it's Penguin, Viking Penguin.
Awesome. And people can grab it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble if that's still a website. Okay, cool. Mark, thank you. You are awesome. Thank you so much for your time and your energy today and sharing that with everyone. And what I'll do is I'll be in contact with your booking lady with the link to this, and you can feel free to share it with whoever you like. So we appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to meet you as well, and we'll talk very soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. All right, Mr. Mark Wolynn, what did you guys think? Man, talk about, really, really, in my opinion, fascinating. This is one of the things that, I think that in the alternative health world, we get so caught up in the physical issues that we all have, right? Like we see, let me take these off. I always forget to take off my headphones. I notice a big difference taking these things off and not having them on my ear. I don't like that for some reason. I can feel like the electromagnetic energy coming off of them or something. So after this show, I'm going to have to go out and get in the sun for a little bit. But it's interesting that, a lot of times people focus on the physical and they're dominated by the physical body and what it can do and what's wrong with it. And, this language, this virus language that we use. And like I was saying to Mark at the end of the show, Extreme Health Radio is really it's just a clever masquerade for personal growth and spiritual connection, really. Because, to be totally honest with you, the physical health of our bodies doesn't really interest me that much. Like, it really doesn't. I don't think about every day about my physical health and, all the different cleanses and colon cleanses and what GABA does and what, B17 does in the body and, how enzymes work. And, should someone take, hydrochloric acid? Should someone not? Should someone be a meat eater or a vegan? It's so far down the line, downstream for me, for what I actually care about. I really just don't care about that stuff too much. I mean, just to be completely honest with you. I care about what those things mean on a bigger level. Like, for example, I care about whether or not a particular diet would affect the earth, right? So if one diet, versus, there's obviously controversy on it, no matter what you look at. But if one diet affects the earth in a negative way, then I'm going to care about that, right? Probably because it's something beyond me. It's not just my physical body. But I'm really not all that concerned with all of these debates that people are having about food. There's a recent debate on the Joe Rogan Experience about, meat eaters and vegetarian. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, nothing could be more disinteresting to me than listen to two people talk about what human beings should be eating. I mean, I don't know. Does it really interest you guys that much? I mean, to me, it doesn't. What matters to me is allowing someone the option of doing some kind of work that would give them the ability to explore expanded ways of thinking so that they could apply those ways of thinking into their life. And as a result of that, they grow in some way. So what does all that mean? So that means for someone who's never really thought about how food can heal or food can destroy our health, or doing, substances can help the body heal from a catastrophic disease, right? So when someone is buried neck deep in the culture that we're living in, that is completely looking at the physical and bowing down to science and not really aware of how our actions affect our body, for someone like that who's eating fast food and they develop a chronic degenerative disease, what interests me is not the fact that they can overcome their disease using diet and cleansing and detoxification. What interests me most is someone like that could be open enough to realize that their lifestyle choices has caused this, and what is being fed to them from the mainstream media isn't the answer, but that they have the power themselves to seek and explore alternative ways of looking at information and applying that to help overcome their disease. And then when they have overcome their disease, or the disease their body has, when they overcome that, the mental and the emotional and the spiritual breakthroughs that happen as a result of someone completely changing their life and then helping others do the same thing, that's what is really inspiring to me. Not that taking B17 can, kill some or re-educate stem cells that are gone wonky. I don't even want to use the C word, right? So it's not the fact that like biochemically I can see the process of how, THC and cannabis will seek out, abnormal cells and destroy them. I mean, that's all fascinating to me, kind of. But what's really most interesting to me is the growth that happens as a result of understanding, coming into this new understanding of how we're living on this earth. And, for me, I'm 42 years old. I feel like I'm just getting started. I have no idea experientially and intellectually how the world works. And for me to have that sort of desire to figure things out and to grow has been the biggest thing that I've been pursuing the last 15 years. And that to me is the most interesting, is where all this stuff takes us. So ultimately it's like, okay, now that you've overcome a disease, so what happens next, right? Jennifer says there's a lot of cool people in the chat room. Jennifer says, I've been learning about energy shifting with the program Trailblazing Communications, and most energy blocks is emotional. It's also DNA generational. Yeah, Jennifer, if you listened to most of the show, I'm not sure if you jumped in late, but that was a lot of what Mark was talking about. I mean, it's so fascinating to me. Great show, somatic experience. Certified therapists can effectively help with changing body-brain dynamics. Sometimes when you do this healing work, the answers you get from the family will be the awful truth. Interesting, yeah. It's so crazy, isn't it? How like, I don't know what it is, but for me personally, I'm really interested in, it's like if I watch a UFC fight or a boxing fight, or if I watch a basketball game, I'm always rooting for the underdog. I just always am. And in our culture, the underdog is the alternative and natural world, the alternative ways of looking at things. And I've heard it described, conventional therapy, like, conventional psychiatric therapy is nothing more than, regurgitating all of your traumas, throwing them up into a big bucket, and then sifting through which ones you want to take back in again. I don't know if that's true, but it's like conventional therapies or conventional food pyramid guidelines from the government, or conventional history, conventional, thoughts about where money comes from, conventional anything. Just, I don't know what it is. I'm always looking for, okay, if that's the conventional way of thinking, then the alternative to me is the most interesting, because it's the underdog, right? It's the suppressed knowledge. It's the understanding that there's much more going on than what they're trying to tell us. And when you start realizing that, for me, life just opens up quite a bit when you start looking at repressed knowledge and things like that. Me Too News says, high cholesterol, ACE scores, poor health, and disease later in mid-30s and shorter lifespans. Maybe you were saying something else before that. Let me scroll up. I Mean Business says, I was deathly afraid of spiders and asked my mother about when I was a teenager, what did she do to me when she was pregnant? I was joking, but it makes sense now. So, I Mean Business, what happened? Did you get exposed to something? It is interesting though. Here's something that's really interesting. Why is it that human beings have an innate fear of spiders and snakes? So if you show a spider or an image of a snake to a little baby toddler, like there's been studies done on this where their nervous system will react to that in a negative way. And that's weird, isn't it? Like, why is it almost universally across the board that would be the case if some of this stuff doesn't get passed down to our, through the generation. I mean, because it's something energetically is happening from a frequency and a voltage and an energetic perspective that's being passed down from generation to generation. It's almost like that verse in the Bible that says God will visit the sins of whatever person it was upon the third and fourth generations. It's little children being born with these fears of these most bizarre things like buttons or shoelaces, or fears that just make no sense, right? Where does that stuff come from? And a lot of this stuff that we talk about in the physical world, when it comes to our bodies and our health and things, they're just the physical manifestations, many levels and steps downstream of an invisible process that's happening that we have no idea what that process is. And there's no way of measuring what that process is, or there's no way to even label what that process is, or even identify what that process is. It's some invisible process that's happening inside the body that's causing the cells to replicate, or for us to have idiosyncrasies or fears or a nervous tic or anxiety. There's some invisible process that's happening that we just have no way of understanding what that is. But we can understand like high blood pressure, right? We can put a number on that. We can give a label to it. We can say, you have high blood pressure. And people that have high blood pressure, wouldn't you know it, there's a medication, right? A chemical synthetic drug that will help lower some number, or a chemotherapy or a radiation that will destroy, the tumor cells of a stem cell that's a cancer cell. But it doesn't do anything to the stem cells. It doesn't do anything to the actual physical or the invisible process of why your body's creating a blood pressure that's higher than normal. But it lowers the number while leaving that invisible process to continue to happen in the background without us knowing it. And so what will happen is that we'll think that it's gone, but the process is still happening. So that will manifest in some other imbalance in the body. And then 5 years later, you have a heart attack, or 5 years later, I should say your body has a heart attack. 5 years later, your body manifests some other physical representation of what that invisible process was. And so all of this stuff makes so much sense to me. So much sense to me. Let me look on Facebook and see if you guys are chatting on there and if there's any questions. If you have any questions about our show, about the Extreme Health Academy, anything like that, let us know. Oh, Carla, this was such a good question. Is the book on audio? You know what, Carla? I think it is. I was on Amazon, and I think it's on Amazon Audible. Did Amazon buy Audible? I feel like they did. In that case, it would be on Audible. So if you guys are interested in that, you can grab it there. Worrying, Anthea says on Facebook, Extreme Health Academy, says, worrying then for moms who have to go back to work, where does that put the child's emotions? Oh my goodness, right? This is the really hard thing, or challenging thing, I should say, is that, when you're starting to realize that all of this stuff is connected, it's hard to put all the pieces together, because it's like we're walking around without a full understanding of how everything's working in the body and in life in general. And so what would be probably helpful in this case would be for you to look, if you have to go back to work and you realize that you were worrying for a good 6 months before going back to work, then it would be interesting to sort of make a mental note and to see what your child's response to upcoming events are, or planning for things, or their ideas about work in general. What I love about this too is that you don't have to really necessarily have your parents still be alive, because like he was saying, the manifestation of every generation that came before us, the pinnacle, the end result of every generation that came before you, you are the physical representation of all of that. All of their hopes, all of their dreams, everything they wish they accomplished lives within all of us, lives within you, and lives within me. And so for us to realize that we don't necessarily need to have anybody be alive or even to know who our real parents were, in my opinion, is incredibly helpful, because this stuff, it works on an energetic, spiritual level. And, you know, from a spiritual perspective and an energetic perspective, you know, the physical, corporeal body doesn't necessarily need to be there, because all this stuff is, you know, lives in a different realm. Carla says, scientists have proven our DNA markers carry ancestral energy markers, not just DNA, not just medically DNA markers. Carla, that's interesting. I'd love to see any studies about that, because, you know, on one sense, we do have to be grounded in science to some degree, right? So it is good to look at studies and to see what they have to say, and not be too often in woo-woo land and spirit world, right? So it's good to have some grounding science to sort of weave into all of this and to balance everything out. So that's always a good thing. I'd love to see some studies on that, actually. But it's like what's his name says. He was on our show a while back. What was his name? Dr. Joe Dispenza. He was saying, you know, neurons that fire together wire together. And so he was saying that on our show that, you know, if you want something different in your life, you actually have to change your personality. So you have to change who you are, change your actual personality in order to change and to make a difference in your personal reality. And so to change your actual personality seems like a daunting task, right? Because we're always telling ourselves, well, I'm not an outgoing person, or I'm not a person who likes to go up and to meet and greet and to do this, that, or the other, or I'm always, you know, I'm just a negative person, or I'm a angry person, or I'm easily set off, I'm easily angered, or we have all these stories that we tell ourselves, but these stories have nothing really to do with us. They're just to make sense of behaviors that we've chosen to engage in, but they have nothing to do with it, who we are on a spiritual level, on a soul level. You know, like, we're not our opinions, we're not our ideas, we're not our motivations, we're something much more than that, right? Because you weren't any less you, but like, let's say you changed from being a Republican to a Democrat. Well, 3 weeks before you made that change, you were still a physical person and a spiritual person. So if we're not our thoughts, we're not our opinions, then who are we? And so doing this deep spiritual work, I mean, this is kind of an interesting show for me, because I've been called to do this work lately, to, you know, dive deeper. And, you know, the last few months have been really busy for us with new twins. But Kate and I were talking about this on our walk yesterday, that it's interesting. I feel like this sort of message has been downloaded to me in the last probably 6 months or so. And it's the idea that we're called to do things based on our natural inclinations and our natural desires. So how does this play out? And how does this affect us? So let's say that let's say we're open-minded people, like we all are listening to this, right? We're open-minded to new ideas and to learning new concepts, and we're not closed off, we're open. Let's say your body has an invisible process of a pre-diabetic condition happening, right? On a subconscious level, you might know this is happening, right? You probably do. Because there are no secrets, right? All information is knowable. And so on a subconscious level, you know this is happening inside your body, right? This maybe pre-diabetes state, let's say, or it could be any disease, right? Any kind of physical challenge that we might be dealing with. Subconsciously, our bodies know this process is happening. It's a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a label, right? You don't have diabetes. Your body's expressing diabetes-like symptoms, and that can always be changed, right? That's how I like to think of it, and not succumbing to a label and turning a verb into a noun. When you turn a verb into a noun, you essentially solidify a diagnosis or a label, and you turn it into something that cannot be changed, or cannot be changed as easily as something like a verb can, because a verb is in that 0 point. A verb is in flux. A verb is something that can be changed based on a number of different circumstances, right? So let's say you're developing the process, this invisible process of something happening in your body. Your subconscious mind knows it, right? But your conscious mind has no idea it's going on. You're not thinking about it. You're just living your life. But somehow you're involved in natural health and you're thinking, you know what, I think it would be really interesting to explore a ketogenic diet, right? I don't know what it is. Something about that diet interests me. And so you start doing some research and, you start exploring it and you start realizing, wow, people are getting such great results. They're losing weight. Maybe you want to physically, on a conscious level, maybe you want to lose a couple pounds and, but maybe ultimately deep down within you on a subconscious level, you know that your body's dealing with a diabetes issue that could manifest itself, right? In maybe 6 more months of living a toxic lifestyle. So your subconscious mind knows that. And so what happens is that I believe our inclinations and I believe that our natural desires for things are a clue as to what's might be happening in our body in that invisible process that we have no idea what's happening there, right? At least on a conscious level. So maybe the real reason why you're drawn to the ketogenic diet is because your body's dealing with this invisible process and you're going to start having symptoms in 6 more months if you keep living a toxic life. And that desire is not so that you'll lose weight, but that desire is to reverse an underlying process that's happening. And so I think this happens with everything, right? I think it happens in every little decision that we make. I think it happens with, wanting to pursue a certain career, or I think it happens as a result of, little decisions like maybe leaving the house and realizing you forgot your water and go back to get your water. If you're in tune with that, maybe that was to save you from getting into a car crash. It's being in tune with this deeper spiritual work that I think is the core of everything we talk about. So I'm curious about what you guys think about all this. It looks like a lot of you guys are chatting in the chat room. This is really great. Me Too says, let's see. I mean business. Interesting. See my comment above about my grandmother's warning about pregnancy. I'd have to find that. Let's see. I mean business. Okay. Yeah, sacred feelings buried alive never die. Feelings buried alive never die. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean business. I'm having a hard time going back and finding your comment here. Equicentric says this must affect the engram personality style as well. Yeah, engrams are interesting subject matter, right? I mean, we've had a lot of people talk about engrams. Adam Bergstrom, most notably, has talked about engrams on our show. And that is, I guess, sort of the same kind of thing as what Mark was talking about, psychological traumas that are sort of downloaded from one generation to the next. So BJ says the chemical attaches to the DNA gene. Wow, this could work directly in gene keys related to human design. Man, it's so crazy. What little we know about what's actually... Oh, BJ's from Texas. Hey, Chris, that's awesome. I see you're here for Rochelle from Florida. Wow, this is so great. So many people from around the world listening. It's just amazing. Santa Barbara, California. Juan Gonzalez, Southgate, California. How awesome is that? Santa Barbara. That's so cool. Terra Potina, Hermosa Human. I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's so crazy how little we know about what's actually going on. We have all these experts in telling you what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, and all this stuff. But man, I tell you, it's a moving target, this health thing, And I think that if we don't look deeper into what's really going on a deep spiritual, emotional issue, if you try to manipulate and change and alter the physical or the spiritual through the physical, in my opinion, both should be worked on at the same time, because one's downstream and one's upstream, in my opinion. So I think that working on both levels would be extremely beneficial, and not letting one feel like it's, or treating one as if it's more powerful than the other. BJ says, has Mark studied his human design chart? I'm integrating human design in all my healing studies to see how it fits into this whole thing. Just curious. Gosh, I wish I had asked him that, BJ. I apologize for that. I didn't see your question until now. I mean, Business says, I'm at work, so I'm missing a lot of the show, but has he mentioned that injuries, diseases show up in the aura first, then physically, if we don't take care of unresolved emotions? Interesting. Yeah, you know who talked about a little bit about the aura on our show years ago was the late, great Dr. Bob Marshall. And he was talking about the sort of plasma energy field of the body and how on a quantum level, the cells at the DNA level, at the quantum level, even deeper, somehow have a communication with this plasma energy field. And he quoted the work of Fritz Albert Popp. And so I'm wondering if that is the same as an aura. It's interesting because Dr. Cruz would say that our sixth sense is our mitochondria. And that's like when you feel like someone is behind you, or you kind of have a feeling someone's looking at you. Someone's like looking at the back of your head or something, and it's a weird feeling. We had what is her name? The kombucha mama. What is her name? I forget what her name is, but she was on our show years ago, and she was talking about kombucha. And during the interview, we were talking about bacteria, and she was surmising and studying how our bacteria are what communicates with other bacteria. So she was researching whether or not, how you get that feeling when you meet someone, you just feel really good about who they are and you just really connect with them. What she was saying was, because over 90% of our body is not even us, it's bacteria and other organisms living within us, using us as a host. Because that's the case, it's the bacteria in our gut that's communicating with the bacteria in someone else's gut, or their microflora throughout their whole body. It's our bacteria that creates that camaraderie. And so that's kind of a sixth sense as well. And so it's not that I feel a connection to so-and-so. It's our bacteria are connecting to each other in some deeper emotional level or some spiritual frequency-based level. And that's what that sixth sense is. Dr. Cruz says it's our mitochondria, which could be true too, because our mitochondria is directly impacted by sound, frequency, noise, vibration, temperature, light. All of these things affect the mitochondria. And mitochondria are like little organisms that are the powerhouse of the cells and send out frequencies to the environment to figure out where we are, so that it can allow the genetic expression to happen in the body, based on that. And so really curious. I'm going to see what some of you guys are saying here. Let me pull this up really quickly. Had quite a few people asking about the Stockton Aloe 1. And, we are physical beings, and physical things do help us. And it's important to not neglect the physical as well. This meat suit is what interfaces with the physical reality. And this is where this reality is so dense that it's what allows us to experience growth. And so, I think it is important to put some emphasis on some of the things we could do physically, and not just live in the world of ideas and live in the world of concepts and live in the world of theory, of getting down into the nitty gritty and actually doing some of the deep work, because that's what helps us have a healthy body. Stockton Aloe 1 is something that I would highly recommend you guys get. You probably already know, if you do like a Google search on the benefits of aloe vera, you'll quickly realize that aloe vera is probably the number one superfood in the world. I mean, it has been used for millennia to help people heal their gut. It's antimicrobial, it's antifungal, it's anti-tumor. It's incredible for your digestive system. And I recommend people get on aloe vera for just as a maintenance. It's like you want to combat a lot of the toxins and chemicals that we're exposed to. Aloe vera is, look at this. If you're watching on YouTube, look at that plant. It's a magical, magical plant. Over 75 different constituents in it, from everything from amino acids to long chain sugars that you don't get anywhere else, like polysaccharides and ace mannan and oligosaccharides. These are long chain sugars that your body uses to heal itself. Ingesting this stuff is going to be incredibly beneficial for your digestion, for your energy levels. And we all know that health begins in the gut. Feeding your body these compounds is incredible. And what's cool about it is that they ship you 2 half-gallon containers, and and they ship them actually frozen. So they're picked and hand harvested raw, unprocessed, unfiltered, unheated, and they hand harvest this stuff, and then they directly bottle it, and then they ship it to you. And they don't even ship on the weekends. That's how much of a stickler they are. So get yourself some of this Stockton Aloe 1. This stuff is really, really, really good. And it's like one of those substances that everyone should be on, as sort of their foundation. And the other thing I want to tell you guys about too is our Bellicon Rebounder. I love this thing. Rebounding, in my opinion, is one of the best exercises you can do. And it's kind of weird for me to say this because I like to work out in the gym. I don't work out inside a gym anymore. I've recently done the home gym thing where I do all my workouts outside in the sun now. But I'm a very active person, and I love hiking. I love surfing. I love working out, and I love being physical and playing basketball and tennis and jiu-jitsu. And, I love these ways of using our body. But I found that over the years that rebounding, simply jumping up and down on a mini trampoline is one of the best exercises that you could ever do for yourself. It helps to clean your lymphatic system. It helps to detoxify your body and flush all of that lymph fluid out of your body. And what a lot of people don't realize is our lymph system is filled with millions of one-way valves, and the only way to get those valves to open up and to express and to squeeze all of that lymphatic toxin out is through using the body and motion. And so it's rebounding is the best way to do that because it uses G-force and your own body weight to create this ability for the body to flush the lymphatic system. And what I like about this is that it uses like these flexi ropes. You can see them here on YouTube, which means it's silent. And so if you ever need to change and upgrade your ropes, you just buy new ropes. We've had ours for like 6 years now, and they're just amazing. And it's also cool too. You can fold the legs, so the easy storage. You put it underneath your bed. You can do it when the kids are sleeping. Helps to build bone density. Helps to increase circulation. I mean, this rebounding. Here's a picture of Kate doing it when we first got ours. It's really cool because I used to jump on a really cheap one back in the day. I tore my ACL doing jiu-jitsu. And I had knee problems. I've never had surgery yet. 80% tear. I had prolotherapy in my knees, but this was right at the time I was getting into rebounding, and I had one of the cheap ones, and I had to stop rebounding because the impact on my joints was so hard. I couldn't do it. And once I got the Bellicon, it was like jumping on a cloud. It makes you leave the mat and catch air without even trying. It's a few pictures of ours there. So yeah, if you guys are interested in bringing into your sort of home one of the best health practices, I'd highly recommend getting the Bellicon Rebounder. And I'll put both of those links in our store, as well as actually I'll do that right now here for you guys so you can take a look at it. This was the Stockton Aloe 1 and the Bellicon Rebounder. And like I was saying before, there's no real way to extract ourselves from this physical existence that we live in. We have to live in this physical body. And so, doing some of these things to take care of your health are incredibly beneficial. So, that's why I'm such a big fan of these ways to help to heal the body. I Mean Business says bacteria communicating like plants, trees, etc. The Dr. Bergman YouTube channel needs a moderator. Bots, and more bots. Interesting. Okay, wow. Yeah, I've noticed that too. Well, Dr. Bergman has, what does he have? About 400,000 people that are on there. So a lot of people talking. That's why I really love the Extreme Health Radio, you guys in the chat room here. That's why I love, because it's more of a community. I like it. It's smaller. It's more, we get to talk, one another and help each other out. And I just feel like there's much more of a connection. I see a lot of you guys, Jennifer, Equicentric, I Mean Business, a lot of you guys I see on a regular basis, and I love that. It's really cool. Let me see if some of you guys, Me Too says, so ironic you mentioned snakes and spiders. Many were associated anciently with power and health and became negative symbols when female healers were burned and prosecuted. Interesting. So how does that work? So snakes and spiders were associated with power and health through women. And then when those healers, when they killed off the women, I guess, is that why? They're all just stories. Ron says, and each of us chooses which of these stories to believe. We are all 100% responsible for everything that happens in our life. Ho'onopono. Yeah, that is, I don't know how to say that, but that's a really powerful ancient Hawaiian prayer. It's a prayer of forgiveness. Ho'onopono, I think. I'll never be able to say that. It's a series of H's and O's and P's. I'm very familiar with it, and I like practicing that as well, but I can never say it. Ho'onopono. I can't say that word. Thanks, Ron, for sharing that. Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. That's what it all comes down to, right? Is taking 100% responsibility for everything that happens in our life. And I like how you worded that. You said taking 100% responsibility for everything that happens in our life, not to us. In my opinion, we create our own reality. We create the things that we need to learn the most from. Jennifer says, I've been learning about energy shifting with, I read that before. Trailblazing. William says, I've heard of studies with baby chicks being raised, isolated, and then shown a picture of a hawk and they get scared. Isn't that crazy? Did Mark share that story? Or was that a different story he shared? I think that was about mice. I don't think he shared that one. Studies with baby chicks being raised, isolated, and then shown a picture of a hawk and they get scared. Yeah, somehow this is really like all of this stuff is embedded deep within us. And I think one of the most freeing and empowering things that we can all do is to realize that, these negative things that we think are negative in our life, like our personality traits, most of the time, they're not even ours. We're taking these on as a way of honoring our mom and dad, and allowing them to not have to go through something so that we could take on their same personality trait and characteristic, so that we can ease them of their burden because of our love for them. My grandmother would say not to it. My grandma would say not to look at anything scary or talk negative about people while touching your pregnant belly, or you would mark the baby. Isn't that interesting? NGramInstitute.com, Equicentric says. Okay, cool. Oh, Hannah Crum. Yeah, Hannah Crum. She's the kombucha mama. Nice, dude. You know your stuff, man. That's great. That's right, Hannah Crum. She was on our show years ago. Yeah. Okay, guys. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Let me just give you a quick update of everything going on in our show. If you guys want to sort of realize what's happening, find out what our shows are. Wednesday, we're going to be talking about herbs and medicinal mushrooms. You talk about a weird, crazy subject. The fungi kingdom, that will trip you out. And the learning about spores and mushrooms, man, go to YouTube and do some documentary watching on mushrooms and you'll be tripped out. But anyway, we're going to be talking about all of this stuff with Yarrow Willard on October 3rd. 10:45 a.m. And then we're going to have on a special show on Thursday, Brandon Amalani. We'll be talking with him about EMF mitigation strategies, personal and spiritual growth as well. He's a cool guy. He's the guy that's behind the Blue Shield products that we have now in our store, which I'm proud to say. So go check those out, the Blue Shield products. Excuse me. And I've had some good conversations with Brandon recently on the phone. I really like what he's doing. And then Matt Blackburn's going to be in studio. We've got some issues here with our microphone, so we need to get those fixed before we can have Matt come in the studio. The studio ones are going to be a little bit different, so we haven't done many live in-studio interviews yet, so that will be an interesting experience if we can pull that off on Friday, October 5th. So a lot of cool stuff happening on Extreme Health Radio. So if you haven't joined, I would highly recommend hitting subscribe wherever you are, wherever you're watching this, and subscribing to our channel. And also make sure to subscribe to our newsletter list. I'll put a link to that in the this way you don't miss anything. www.extremehealthradio.com/subscribe, CRIBE. That way you don't miss any of the shows. We keep everyone updated as to all of our shows that are happening, all of our past shows, and it's really a cool way to stay up to date. We email twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. Also wanted to tell you guys too that there's some cool things happening in regards to a couple events. I want to share with you guys some things here. So let's see. The Autoimmune Disease Summit is coming up. Let me put a link to that. That is happening. Autoimmune disease. If you're currently dealing with anything like that, that starts today, actually October 1st, 2018. So make sure to register for that if you know anyone that has an autoimmune disease, or I should say whose body has an autoimmune disease, because we're not our bodies, right? The next one is October 9th. Let me put a link in the chat room here. This is the Truth About Cancer Summit. I highly, highly recommend signing up for these things, because especially the Truth About Cancer. This is massive, guys. This is really, really massive. And I really want to spread the word about this, because as you guys know, I got involved in all of this because of this cancer business. And then also, if any of you guys are watching, if you're in the LA area, let me put a link to a thing that a former guest of ours is doing, Brian Hoyer. He was just on our show recently, and he does a lot of work with EMF mitigation, and he is a building biologist, and he's having he's doing a workshop, and he's also meeting with people in the LA area starting October 22nd all the way to the 29th of 2018. And you can work with him. We did a show with him a couple days ago, and you can work with him to help build a house that's protected from 5G, a Faraday cage inside your whole house. This guy's top notch, man. So if you're in the LA area, or if you're not, contact him. I put a link there. I'll put a link in the description below as well. But contact him, because he can help you mitigate your house. Really important stuff to do. And then there's a female hormone summit. So if you're female watching this and you have any hormonal issues, that one starts November 5th, 2018. So I'll put a link there as well. I'll put a link, if you're listening on the podcast and you still want to get access to all of this stuff, I'll put a link at on this show page, which is, let me make sure I get this correctly, extremehealthradio.com/614. That will be the show page where I'll put all the links for this. So if you're listening in the future, check that out. Equicentric says, just for info, it's pronounced Enneagram. Enneagram? Is that how you say it? Enneagram? I've always heard Adam Bergstrom call it engrams. Enneagram. Enneagram. Okay. That's cool. Equicentric, thank you, Justin and Chatters. Come and listen. Republicbroadcasting.org. Okay. Okay, we'll check that out. Republicbroadcasting.org. All right, guys, we love you guys so much. Thanks you for being a part of our show. You rock, and it's such a great honor to be here with you. Make sure to check out our store. And one final thing, too. If you haven't realized and you make purchases on Amazon, consider going through our link, extremehealthradio.com/Amazon. There's a link on our homepage. That way you can purchase on Amazon. Nothing changes for you, but we'll get a little credit for it and help support the show. And also, thank you guys who are Patreons. If you like our work and you want to send us a couple dollars a month, there's a link on our extremehealthradio.com, and you can see where it says Patreon if you scroll down, and that's another way that we pay all the bills for all of this software that we use and all this equipment that we have, so we appreciate that. Finally, if you have not yet joined the Extreme Health Academy, make sure to join, because we're bringing all of this stuff to what we're doing there in the Extreme Health Academy. We're doing courses. We're focusing on every aspect, the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, the light, the biophysics, obviously the food, the diet, the nutrition, all of these angles, the spirituality, all of this stuff is areas that we're going to be exploring and have explored inside Extreme Health Academy. So make sure to join. If you really want to take your health to new levels, it's the place to be. Thousands of people in there that have joined and that are communicating with each other, supporting each other in the forums. It's an awesome place. So I want to give you a discount code for being so amazing, and I love you guys. So if you guys want to join, it is extremehealthacademy.com, and then you can add EHR14 as the coupon code if you want a free 14-day trial. And if you're a Dr. John Bergman fan, just do Bergman 14, and that will give you a free 14-day trial. You can check it out and see how you like it and see all the content. We're adding content every single week there, and we're going to be reaching out to other practitioners doing in-depth courses. It's going crazy. So if you have a health condition, health challenge, join the Extreme Health Academy. I'm telling you guys, it is the best place and the alternative in the natural world. And maybe what we'll do is, don't tell anybody this, maybe we'll reach out to people like Mark, and maybe he can do some courses and some workshops for the Extreme Health Academy when it comes to this kind of family constellation stuff. That would be really, really cool. So we're reaching out. We're doing so many things inside this membership. So extremehealthacademy.com is where you want to be. Sign up, get your free 14-day trial, check it out, say hello in the forums and introduce yourself. And we'd love to have you there. So that is it for today. We love you guys very, very much. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go break my fast. I've been fasting since about 5 o'clock p.m. yesterday. So getting a little bit hungry here. Finally, the ghrelin is setting in. So anyway, we love you guys so much. You are amazing. Let me bring up our little legal disclaimer here. Yeah, we just love you guys so much. It's so awesome that you're here. And so thank you very, very much. And we love you, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog is discussed in the context of numerous conditions, it can be dangerous to take action based on any information in this blog or to start any health program without first consulting a health professional. The content found here is for informational purposes only and is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as a treatment/cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be continued as such. Always work with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. This information is provided as is, and the reader/viewer assumes all risks from the use, non-use,